Hello, everyone. I am enjoying watching the chat already. I'm excited that you all are excited to talk a little bit more about Johnston County today, especially on a day that feels really gloomy outside. Having all the sunshine inside the room is really uplifting me. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon. My name is Devin Desjarlais. I am Director of Marketing and Storytelling at United Way of the Greater Triangle. This is United Way's third Justice Series event of the year. And if you missed the first two, which focused on affordable housing and equitable grant making respectfully, you can find the recordings on our Facebook page, facebook.com/UW Triangle. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. Like I mentioned, my name is Devin Desjarlais, and this is an ongoing communication series where we explore what justice looks like in practice within the communities that United Way funds, and also how justice-oriented solutions best position communities to create systems-level change. For those of you who are new here and maybe new to United Way, I'll give you kind of a little bit of a description of what we do. So United Way has the bold mission to eradicate poverty and increase social mobility through the power of partnerships. And with that mission, we serve a 4-county region in North Carolina of Wake, Durham, Orange, and Johnston counties. For 133 years, which, believe it or not, is how long the United Way brand has been around nationally and globally, United Ways across the country have served those crushed under the weight of impoverished environments. And that service has looked, felt, and sounded a lot like charity. Yet the issues have not gone away, and they have actually gotten worse, and that's especially true for Black and Brown communities. So we recognize that the next 133 years and beyond demand more than that. Our communities need solutions that honor the history that residents have weathered and the lessons they're taking with them into the future. And it's through an orientation of justice that we can look for solutions that attack the root causes and don't just deal with the effects of poverty. So I just want to call something out here really quickly, and then I'll introduce the panelists here in 1 second, but I think it's important to give you guys a little bit of the lay of the land and a little bit of background information. I'm going to call it out here. Systemic racism is going to be a big focus of today's conversations. And that's because systemic racism, by definition, is embedded as a normal practice within today's society. It can feel so normal that you might not be aware it exists. And if hearing about this makes you feel uncomfortable, we do have a racial equity challenge we'd like to introduce you to. And I say that jokingly, but it's important to note that systemic racism, we're not talking about individual racism here. We're talking about what's embedded in today's society through history of policies and procedures and interactions. And how do we recognize that and figure out how we navigate to change? And that's what justice is. So again, speaking of justice, there I go. Let's define what justice means here exactly, because we're not talking about the justice system. We're referring to a future where systemic barriers have been removed so that individuals have the same opportunities to succeed regardless of race, gender, economic status, and more. But in rural communities that are still racially divided, where income is lower, transportation options are minimal, and policies aren't created to support the greater good necessarily, justice can sometimes feel like a bit of a pipe dream. It can feel like a big hurdle to overcome. And we're here to tell you that it's not a pipe dream, but that getting there will be far from easy. And it's going to take all of us, united, if you will, to get there. We'll need to lean on the communities and the leaders that know their communities best and to define what the best solutions look like. And that's part of United Way's funding strategy. It's also exactly where the panelists come in today. But before I introduce the panelists, again, just want to be clear that this isn't an us versus them conversation. We're talking about, and it's not like, we're not othering here. We're not saying like, we have to do this to help those people over there. We're talking about how policies influence you, how it influences the people you love, the people you work with, and even who you sit next to in the movie theater back when we were allowed to do such a thing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two dynamic leaders in Johnston County today. Between them, they have more than 63 years of leadership experience. Tina Ray, who you see on the screen today, is the Community Service Block Grant Director at Johnston Lee Harnett Community Action, which is a 55-year-old nonprofit organization that provides resources to help improve the lives of disadvantaged adults and families in that region. And through her leadership, their STARS program is helping low-income residents in Johnston, Lee, and Harnett counties develop self-sufficiency by identifying and eliminating barriers that have previously prevented them from becoming independent. Beth Moore is the Family Resources Manager for the Partnership for Children of Johnston County, a nonprofit organization that helps improve the safety, health, and emotional well-being of young children by enhancing the quality of childcare, supporting strong families, and reaching out to at-risk kids. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Beth, for being here and taking time out of your day. We really, really appreciate it. So let's jump in here with some questions. So before we can talk about the change that Johnston County residents need, we really need to understand where we're coming from here. So like, this is where we're just going to jump right into a conversation of systemic racism. So like many areas of the South, Johnston County has a deep history with racism. For example, Smithfield had a billboard that stood to the entrance of the town for 10 years that said KKK welcomes you to Smithfield. It was only removed in 1977, which is less than 50 years ago. And Beth and Tina actually made me aware, because I wasn't aware of this, that on the other end of Johnston County, there was a billboard that said, "You're now entering Ku Klux Klan country." So tell us, can both of you tell us a little bit about how you think Johnston County's history with racism has created the poverty we're seeing today and the lack of social mobility we're seeing?
Okay, I'll step in. Good afternoon, everybody. Born and raised in Johnston County, and I remember those signs, but not just the signs, but what it stood for. There used to be marches and by the Ku Klux Klan through Johnston County, and it was accepted. And I think that very acceptance allowed it really to take root, take hold. And how is it impacting today? Because it was a lot of people that were qualified for positions that would have taken them and their families and their communities out of poverty, but they weren't afforded the opportunity to have those jobs because the jobs were given to a friend of theirs or a family member. So jobs were good jobs were a lot of them. I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of the jobs were given to people based on who you knew rather than what you knew. And so what was left over was, and we call it barn and tobacco. We worked in the tobacco at the barn or in the field. Then you went to one of the factories or whatever, because those were the options that were open, because the good paying jobs and the jobs where you may be qualified for, but was not considered for. So when that happens over a period of time, the platform is already set. It's already set for you to fail or to live below the poverty guideline. Not even at it, but below the poverty guideline. And it went on and on. You saw businesses popping up everywhere, this company and son. And so their kids are already set. Those positions that required more than manual labor were already occupied by somebody else. So they may have been not qualified at all, and you hired and you had to teach them, to work with them, to help them do their job, but they got the title, they got the money, and you went home and eligible for every type of entitlement program there is, food stamps, Medicaid, whatever the case may be, not because you weren't working, but because you weren't making enough to sustain your household, maintain your bill.
And it's still happening today with that, Tina. I notice the schools that are getting built in, even the relatively new high schools, like Cleveland High School was where my own children went, and they had brand new state-of-the-art equipment and everything is beautiful. And then we look at Triple S, that's been there a while, and it's in predominantly Black and brown community, and the upgrades haven't gotten done, and our students feel that, right? Like our kids feel that when they travel to different schools for sporting events, and when we used to be able to travel pre-COVID, but it's very noticeable. And I worry a lot too. I know we didn't talk about this on our pre-call, but I really worry with even our youngest students of that social emotional trauma that's being
Right,
brought in still by racism.
right. And to piggyback on that, Beth, I was a product of segregation, segregated schools. I never had a book that didn't have 2 or 3 names in it. There was damage to the book when we got it, but at the end of the school year, we had to pay damage before we had to pay a damage fee before we could get our report cards. Now the book's already damaged when we got them, and that was, you think, well, that was way back then. And then I see with a shift, some of the same things happening when my kids went to school. And then there's another shift, and I see some of the same things with my grandkids. And so, you say that was back then. If it was back then and it had been dealt with rather than swept under the rug, if it had been dealt with then, we would not be facing the problems we're facing now. So,
and that's one of the policies I really think needs to be looked at nationally, statewide, and community-wide is the curriculum, because our textbooks have been whitewashed, and we know that. The more work I get to do on equity and the more history I actually learn that was not taught and still not being taught, it's mind-boggling what we're not teaching. So I think on that systemic level, starting at those high policies and curriculum and really looking at, well, why aren't we teaching this? Because really, white people don't want to look at it. That's why. They don't want to know. It's easier not to know is, a lot of what I hear.
That's right. And to sit at a table and you're supposed to be discussing the issues of the day, systemic racism, and you're talking, but it's like they're not listening. They can see you, but they're not hearing it. And I don't know where it's a conscious bias or unconscious, but the problem is it exists. And until you recognize it and call it what it is, you cannot begin to affect any kind of change until you name it. You know what it is. So I know that systemic racism is alive and well. It's alive and well. January 6th proved that. I'm not going political, but January 6th proved it was alive and well. And a lot of those people came from Johnston County. So you have those things. And so you're dealing with those. And your kids are subjected to it. Your neighborhood is subjected to it. So how many times can you tell me no before I begin to believe I'm not worthy? How many times do you put me in an environment that is not conducive to learning, that is not conducive to bringing everybody along, and that everybody is equal, that have equal rights to whatever the bounty is on the table? But I'm not privy to it. I'm a spectator. How long do you get along, to go along to get along? Those days are over of going along to get along. It's time to stop it, and it's time to peel back the carpet, vacuum it up or chisel it out, because it's been there so long, it's probably like stone. But then to get a chisel or a jackhammer and get rid of those ideologies and work on what can we do to bring about a brighter future for our children, our grandchildren, for this county, for this community, for this county, for this state, for this nation, for this globe, because it is a global thing. But what we're facing right now is the things that are still in place to hold people down today, Black people down today.
Absolutely. And Tina, that's going to be up to white people to figure out what are they willing to give up in order for everybody to come up, right? I have a very dear friend that says all the time, she's a beautiful African-American woman. She asks me all the time, as a white woman, she says, personally, what are you willing to give up so I can come up? And that's where we need to get to on that individual level in order to be able to affect those systems and start really dismantling that racist, systematic barriers that we have.
That's right. And even with that, just if you look at what's going on now and the policies that some of our legislators are trying to put in place to suppress voter rights, I mean, all of these to curb or limit the length of early voting, to do away with all, because the election didn't go as they wanted it to go. I've been voting for decades, and some of my candidates have won, some of my candidates have lost. Oh well, you shake it off, you work harder the next time, do everything you can to try to make sure that the ideas and the policies are put in place that's going to help everybody come along. That everybody, no, everybody think it's they just want somebody to give them this and give them that. I don't need you to give me anything, but I don't need you to lock the door. And when you look at the face of equity or even the very definition of equity, as we're looking at it today, systemic. So you don't want the policies to change. You don't want the true history taught to children in the schools. And there's an old adage that say, if you do not know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. But we're not going there. But when you have all these things in place, this is an excellent opportunity. It's an excellent opportunity to say, okay, where do we go now? How can we ensure that everybody has a seat at the table? And like I said, going back to the racial equity piece. So you're looking at, okay, we're having a track meet, and it's an 880 relay, and everybody's ready, and you pumped, and everybody waiting for that baton. You've got to make sure that it's handed off just right. But you're already halfway down that field. 440 meters have passed, and somebody's standing at the gate trying to get in. Well, when they start the race, there's already half the field that's covered. So there's a lot. You got to run harder, run smarter, run faster to even get to the place where our white counterparts, and I'll say some of our white counterparts, there's nothing that's completely everything, 100% of anything. That they are already gone past that point. And yet you get upset because you think somebody's trying to take something or change something that you're used to. We're used to a lot of things that were not right. Everybody say they want this pandemic to end so they can get back to normal. We weren't normal in the beginning. So now this would have been an excellent opportunity to examine yourself and examine the communities you live in and see, am I doing everything I can to make my community better? And what am I doing to advance the cause of equality and equity and social mobility? What am I doing? And if you're not doing anything, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So it's an excellent time for self-examination and then to move forward. Okay, Beth, you know me,
You're absolutely right. And I love that we just jumped right into this conversation. And one thing that this got me thinking about as you guys were talking, and I think this is a great segue into us kind of sharing some statistics about poverty rates in Johnston County is, when there are isolated incidences that people can wrap their heads around, say, for example, instances of child abuse. There's a community conversation around, we have to stop this. We have to fix this for this child so that their trauma doesn't carry with them into adulthood, so that they have a chance of succeeding. But when that trauma is built into our systems and we don't know, and it feels like too big of a hurdle to jump, we just kind of sweep it away. And having these conversations is what's going to change that, because we need to have, we need to be taking the same approach of, we have to fix this now so that this trauma does not perpetuate.
That's right.
And so, speaking of trauma, let's go into some of the statistics really quickly. You all set it up really well from a story perspective, but for those folks who might be joining us from Wake or Durham or Orange County, which is very close to Johnston County, or relatively close to Johnston County, but light year is different. 12.8% of Johnston County residents are experiencing poverty. For reference, that's nearly 27,000 people, so 26,988 to be exact, according to the most recent census. And among the children in Johnston County, of all the children in Johnston County, 20.6 of them are experiencing poverty every day. So if you're a child, you're more likely to be experiencing poverty than an adult in Johnston County. And Tina, I know in conversations we had leading up today, you mentioned everything from public transportation to local policies being a barrier to justice for Johnston County residents.
Right.
And Beth, you mentioned something as unnecessarily complex as the disparities in electric prices in areas with substandard rental housing. You know, what challenges are you seeing that are pervasive in today's Johnston County communities that speak to kind of what we're talking about here?
Johnston County, with its long history, there is no reason that there's not a public transportation system. So say you live in Princeton, which is the easternmost part of the county, but the job is opening. There's a big boom, hiring boom in Clayton, but you don't have transportation to get there. So the job may as well be in Istanbul, because if you can't get there and you can't depend on, a friend of mine said they're going to take me every day and I pay them, that very rarely works out. And so there is no transportation system in Johnston County. And so you go to work at Bojangles and you go to work at Hardee's and McDonald's, but you have gone there because you don't have an option. You can't get to it. And with the housing, the rent, there are some complexes that are being built now that the applicant has to make. The income has to be 3 times. I thought it was 2 once, but it's 3 times the amount of what the rent is going to be. And we're seeing rents $17,000, $18,000, $2,000 in Johnston County. And we're also seeing homelessness for that very reason. Low paying jobs. Doesn't mean you're not working. It means you're not making a living wage. So you got low paying jobs. You have no transportation. You have the low paying jobs, you have high rent, it equals homelessness. And so the poverty and the systemic racism, and it is couched there, finds a new home, a new definition, a new place to hide. To say, well, they didn't meet the qualifications, but the qualifications are changing every day.
Right. And even like when Devin was talking about the electric bill and stuff like that, and you know, the programs that can help our families a lot of time are not necessarily accessible. And that's one of the biggest issues is without transportation, without accessibility, you can have all the programs in the world, but it's not helping the people that it needs to help. So, you know, we need to look at, again, it's all the systems, right? The housing system, the utility system, the healthcare system, all of the things that we do have resources and programs are not always accessible. And it's just disproportionately affects our Black and Brown communities.
It does. And even with the emergency assistance programs that are in place, like we have it here at the agency, Department of Social Services have it from, you know, there are certain times of the year. But the thing is, say one of the programs we have, it can only pay 1 month utility or 1 month rent, and it has to be like the rent, the utility, and the tax that go along with it. But it can't pay multiple months, and it can't pay all these other charges. And so the utility company may say that's not enough, and the person may be out of work with no hope of going to work. And so your hands are tied because the funding source sets up what you can do, the requirements of what you can and what you cannot do.
And that's that policy part, right,
Yeah.
Tina? That's that policy part that's set by
Yes.
Local, state, federal governments and set by the different funders that make it nearly impossible for families experiencing poverty. You know, technically they can't discriminate against race because that would be illegal,
Right.
but it's still happening. And it's because of all of these hoops that make people have to jump through to get to a place of a living wage or a safe housing or any of that. So really looking at that policy and those rules that say, oh, well, if you committed a crime, you can't stay in public housing or, you know, any of that thing. And we're just seeing, even with that, people experiencing more poverty instead of less, and more hopelessness, really. If you're told, like you were saying, earlier too, you're told no all the time. And why would you trust the people that say, oh, well, we have this great program, come and check it out? Well, they've been tired. You know, people are tired. They're tired of not being able to get ahead.
Right. And our self-sufficiency program, you could be enrolled in it for up to 2 years. And believe it or not, a large part of the first year is spent on really dealing with a mindset. I've been told no so many times. I have failed so many times. I know it's not going to work. And so even having to navigate through that in order to even get them to a point where they believe I can do this. I can do this. And sometimes you had to go back and say, one of the questions is, what are your hopes? What are your dreams? And they say, well, I want my child to go to Head Start. We said, well, okay, they already registered, or you can get them registered today. Okay, well, I want this. And I said, no. What do you want for yourself? And they then said, wait a minute, let me rephrase this. What did you want to be when you were growing up? I want to be a nurse. What's stopping you? We can help you do that in this program. And so even getting to a point that they are trusting, we'll open up just enough, just that crack, just enough to let you in, that they can begin to believe you and believe what your program, and you're not doing it yourself. We're not doing it because they had to set their own goals, because if we set them, they're our goals for them, for the client. So the client themselves have to set their own goals. We can tell them, it's a wonderful goal to own a home, but that's long term. But maybe short term, you need to look at getting a job. And so you couch it in such a way that you don't shut it down. You keep hope alive, and then we got another program that can work with them to help them become home buyers. You get ready for it.
And home buyers education we work on too. Also, Tina, we really do. We really have that built in, that strengths-based model that says that we should work together, because I have no idea what your idea of success looks like. How dare I put my idea of success on somebody else? And so one of our recent mottos over the last few years is nothing about me without me. Wow. And what we really want, we want families with lived experiences to be informing our programmatic things that we have at the office, informing what is it that you need. I have no idea what you need, right, Tina? If you and I are sitting there talking on the street and we meet each other, I don't know what you need, nor do I know what you want without having that conversation and asking. And if we don't start putting families with lived experiences and people of color on our boards and on our advisory committees, we're still going to be in the same space. We still don't know.
That's right. And even when they're sitting across the desk from us, we need to always remember this pandemic has been a true teacher, if you would look at it that way, because you could have been flying high, everything was fine, spin on a dime, and everything has changed. So we need to listen, and the only way you could to listen to them is to be silent. Take those letters and write them down. It's the exact same letters. What's the letter that spells listen also spells silent. We have to listen, be silent and listen, because how can you hear if you're talking?
Absolutely. Wow, I had something that I wanted to say as a segue, and it's completely left my mind, because I'm so struck by what you just said about how, the same letters that spell listen spell silent. That's an incredible point. One thing, before we move on really quickly, I did want to note we will have a Q&A session at the end. I'm loving the chat that's happening here. I'm loving how people are getting involved. If you have any particular questions that you'd like answered by our panelists during the Q&A portion, drop it in. There's a Q&A button at the bottom there. Just go ahead and drop it in there. We'll be paying attention, and we'll get to that at the end too. So I just wanted to call that out for folks. But the one thing interesting that I learned recently is that the term pull yourself up by your bootstraps was originally meant to be sarcastic. like, oh, what are they going to do? Pull themselves up by their bootstraps? Because it's such a ridiculous notion that for somebody to solve the problems that have been created based on the barriers placed against them is as simple as them just trying harder. And, you know, it's the conversation that you guys are having is really signifying for me, you know, how ridiculous that statement is, but the need for the community to lift up the individuals and to create the change that's needed. And I know you both and your organizations are part of this, you know, creating the change in Johnston County and the positive shifts. And I was wondering if we could talk for a few minutes about, you know, what positive shifts are you seeing Johnston County make towards justice? You know, what are you all working on in particular that is worth highlighting? Because I think, again, like you were saying, Tina, and you too, Beth, that it's a fine line between helping somebody reach their goals and stopping them from dreaming. And if we know about the positive things that are happening, maybe we can feel the goalpost getting a little bit closer. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the statement about pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like that's one of those American frames to me that is about the individual and that working harder. I usually tell people, because our organization focuses on families that have children 0 to 5. So, you know, if I hear something like that, I typically will be like, well, my clients have booties. So what do you want them to do? Pull themselves up by their booty straps? Like, that doesn't really work. So we do work on some of the reframing for people in the community, and our programs are pretty comprehensive, right? So the part of our organization works directly with childcare facilities, and we know in childcare they work with the classroom teachers. We know childcare workers are deemed essential. However, they're extremely underpaid. Again, it's a mostly women field, and our Black women are paid even less than the white women in such a low paying field as well. And those are numbers, like, I don't make up those numbers, y'all. Those are pretty clear numbers. We know this. But we work to improve the quality of childcare, because we also know that children coming from good quality childcare have a better chance of success in later school years. And then our family programs, we are working to infuse an equity lens on everything we're doing within the partnership. We've created a team within the organization to work on equity within the organization, right? Because it has to start there too, that individual journey, and then looking at your own organization. And then in our strategic plan, we also have a charge to look at equity throughout the county and help start conversations like this with different agencies, to encourage different agencies. Let's look at your policies. What's going on in your agency? What can we learn from each other as we do this important work? It's slow. It's a slow process. It is. And I have to sometimes remember, like, racism didn't start yesterday. It's been 400 years that need to be looked at and revisited. And we can't rush into things, as far as it's just not going to happen overnight, as much as I would love that to, right? We have to be very thoughtful and intentional of looking at every single policy, every single system, in order to make a change. And like I said, the partnership is really working hard to infuse that equity lens into everything we're doing through our campaign for grade level reading. We are working on a lot of collaborations within the county to help do that.
Okay. And touching again, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We work with a lot of people who don't have boots, who don't have shoes. So how do you pull yourself up by something that is non-existent? I often tell people that our motto, or the promise of community action, is helping people, changing lives. But our agency said that we need to change over to from the womb, that we offer services from the womb to the tomb, because we have an early Head Start program, that is for pregnant moms, and then it goes to infants and toddlers, to the preschoolers, and right on up to our reverse mortgage program. So we have programs that from every age, every population, we work with them. We work with them, trying to help them become self-sufficient. Our poverty guidelines, they have increased this year some. When you're working with people who are below the poverty guide, 100% of the poverty guidelines, you are talking less than, I mean, it's sad to think anybody could live a life on the income, some of the incomes that we see that come through those doors, and some of the needs that are presented here. As far as our equity lands, we have 160 staff members here, and 114 are people of color. So we might try to make sure that our staff is representative of the people that we serve, because I may not feel safe with you, Beth, coming to tell you my innermost thoughts and fears, or even my hopes and dreams, because I need to first trust you enough to trust you with those dreams. What are you going to do with it? And why should I trust you? Because I don't know you, and you look like who's always been on the wrong side of me. So it's going to take time, and it may never happen. But the only thing that we can do is to make sure that if they may leave here without help, but I pray God they never leave here without hope. That if we can't help them, that we can at least refer them to somebody who can. And even back with Head Start, the whole premise of Head Start was to take Head Start parents, hire them to work in the classrooms, educate them so that they could become teachers. So that's the whole premise. And that would be, you help each one helping one. You reach somebody, each one reach someone. And this whole agency, we have a dynamic leader, Dr. and Mrs. E. Marie Watson, who has a focus, who really does. She can look beyond what's sitting in front of her. And she has an uncanny ability sometimes to see what you're capable of, what your passion, it will enable you to complete this task. And as you complete one task and another one is assigned on another one, then you get more self-confident, and then you're more able to tackle. But you also need to never, ever remember that, but by the grace of God, you could be sitting on the other side of the desk. So you have to keep that in mind. I may be here today, but I may be on this side of the desk tomorrow asking for help. Treat me with respect. Listen to me, not just look at me. And I know we're going to move on. I did a workshop on Tuesday, and Tuesday. And one part I left my mic mute, and I did it on purpose. But I was talking gibberish because I was on mute. And then nobody in the audience, they just kept on talking. And I was talking with my hands. And then finally somebody said, "You're muted." And I waited, and they said, "You're muted." And then I came off, because so many times it seems like if your color is different, I'm black, you're white, sometimes you see me, but you don't hear me. I'm talking, and you've already framed in your mind because of stereotypes and other myths that you heard over the years. You don't think I'm capable because I don't look a certain way. I don't respond to what you perceive to be the acceptable way. And so even though I'm talking and you're sitting there listening to me or looking at me, you're not listening to me. And until you hear my whole story, you're so busy formulating what you're going to tell me or how you're going to tell me no, that you did not hear anything that I said. And if we don't get anything out of this today, listen, free your mind from everything that's around you that has been bombarding you, because we're loaded with distractions, cell phone notification, all these sounds and stuff, distractions. But if we stop and just stand still and listen and focus on, because they deserve your time and your energy. Focus on the person that's talking to you. And then reframe it back to them to make sure that what I'm getting ready to say is exactly what you said. And if it's not, correct me, and give them that freedom that they can correct you. You know, man.
Thank you for that. We have a few minutes left, and we've kind of walked everybody through the history today, the good things that are happening, and I want us to take a little bit of a look at the future and where everybody who's listening today can play a part. And so I wanted to ask both of you, if you had a magic wand, what would Johnston County's future look like, and how can everyone who's watching today, like what can they do? What actions can they take beyond, maybe not beyond, including changing how they approach and speak to and are open to people who do not look like them, who are not from the same experiences and the same backgrounds? But how can everyone watching today support that push towards community justice?
Such a good question, Devin. And if I had a magic wand, I wouldn't have a job, right? Because that would mean that all children and families were receiving what they need to be successful.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have to have a job. That would be great. And I know I can be idealistic, but somebody has to, right? There are ideals that we need to work for and that we need to strive for. And ending racism, being anti-racist, is one of those goals that should be everybody's.
Right.
I think that to start that journey, because it is hard work, I think that that 21-day racial equity challenge that y'all put out is a great place for people to start that do not know that they're racist. Even like a lot of white people don't even think that they're racist, and that, or I shouldn't say that like that. White advantage is real. It means that just because I was born white, I have different advantages than my friends of color, and that the people of color in my community have, just because I was white, and no other reason. I don't even say white privilege anymore, because a lot of times people think of privilege as wealth. Yeah. And, they'll say things like, oh, I was born poor. It doesn't mean that. Educate yourselves individually of what this looks like and what has happened to the people that we love. Like you said in the beginning, we love and work with people of color every day that are being affected by this. So as a white person, as a white leader in my community, it is my job to help end this, to be an anti-racist. And so moving forward, get involved in some of the community organizations that are trying to end racism. Work with your community and like Tina said, listen, absolutely listen. And don't try to, like, I'm never going to negate somebody else's experience. That's the other thing, right? Listen and accept that that's the experience you're hearing, even when it's hard. So I will continue doing this work, and whatever comes up, we'll work on it together, because I do care about our community.
Right. And piggyback on Beth, it is, I guess, a lot of times, and you're sitting at the table, I've sat at a couple of tables where we're working on dismantling racism and racial reconciliation, and to see a sort of a disconnect. And it's, well, I don't see that. And I said, well, why would you see that? You're white, I'm black, you're not privy to the same reactions or sometimes the same conversations that I experience, almost on a daily basis. And so, and then for one to say, you have to be careful about that word racism. It's so negative, because you call it what it is. You can't dress it up. So even for anybody who's listening and you're having this conversation, when somebody speaks their truth, listen. And you can't put yourself in their shoes, but open your mind, open your heart, examine yourself. And you may not like what you see. And you may, one person made the comment, I am examining everything I hear and re-examining everything I say, because I wasn't even aware of some of the things that I'm saying that that has been said around me in conversations I participated in. To me, that's a tick more up, that you are willing to listen and acknowledge that there's a problem. We try to make sure that when we're looking at programming from an agency standpoint, that we do community needs assessments. Because if we're putting programs in the community that the community doesn't need, then that's money wasted, and they're no better off than they were in the beginning. So we are very intentional about the community needs, the results of community needs assessment, and then seeking funds that is going to that's going to help further that cause. Because all of it takes all of us together. There's a book by Mark Rank called One Nation Underprivileged, America in Poverty. And it is deep. And the Perception Institute, if you can look that up, those two things. And it was written a long time ago, but it could have been written last week. Somebody could have written it today, and it would have been apropos for what we're facing today. So if our leaders, and not just our leaders, if the people in the county, the residents of this county, would look at what is going on in this county, look at themselves, educate themselves, and the role they're playing in it, because if they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. So do self-examination. Self-examination is not always pleasant. You may not like what you see, but you're just right. You're just in the perfect position to change. And all of us, everybody run around like, I don't know, you're familiar with Who Moved My Cheese? The concept, if anybody have dealt with early childhood, they probably heard of Who Moved My Cheese. The world has changed. There is no longer an unlimited amount of cheese. So it's been moved, but are you willing to take the steps to find it, to find a new source, to look at it as, well, that one is gone. What can we do? And how can we work together? How can we work together? What would my ideal Johnston County look like?
Thank you both.
That we just spend time and the effort to learn about each other. And people say, I don't see color. Yeah, you need to see color, because my culture may be different, but it may be even more similar to yours than you think. But see me, and then we celebrate those cultures. And you think about it. We don't have to be a melting pot where all of us just mesh and become one. But if we can walk side by side, and respect each other's differences, and your right to have those differences, but that we do it in a respectful way, that people are not in fear for their life to speak their truth, because they don't know what's going to happen, who's going to show up at that door, or who's going to attack them here or there. If we could just do that, I think we would have a better Johnston County, a better North Carolina, a better country.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. I've only seen one come through the chat so far, so I'll start with that one. But if anybody has any questions, please drop it into the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can get to in the next 8 minutes or so. Somebody did ask, how have you seen systemic racism impact children during the pandemic?
We've seen a lot of disparities with especially technology access.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they moved the schools to virtual, a lot of people of color and Hispanic friends didn't have the technology needed. And if they were in some of these really rural areas, even if we try to give them tablets and stuff like that, they infrastructure for internet in the first place. So we've seen that. And then a lot of times just with the pandemic, the numbers that are coming through even in the healthcare system, that COVID's disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities. So even trusting vaccines and trusting medical help has been extremely evident right now in the families that we've been working with.
Right. And in so many instances, you know, people will say, was the kids didn't log on. And then when they backtrack and find out, they said, you know, they expected the parents to get them on. That's what the school system and some of the powers that be expected to happen. But how can I log my kid on and I can't log myself on? And they said, well, they're on Facebook all the time. It's very simple to pick up your cell phone and there's Facebook in your face. But when you're talking about navigating, creating a username and creating all these different tracks to try to get to, it has been so challenging to so many people. And I think a lot of our kids, because some of the parents, but say, I'm not even gonna participate in this. I'm not even thinking about this. And I think it's almost like a defense mechanism where I don't want my child to know just how what they may perceive to be ineffectual as a parent, as a teacher. And so I don't do anything. I let them think I don't care. Well, it's going to translate to that child that I don't care. And so they're not going to perform as well. And I think in some of the other cases, like some of our smaller kids, you may see more kids acting out. One thing, they're absorbing your fear. And we have been glued to all levels of social media, all these platforms, anything we've heard about the pandemic, and all of these scary stories that have come out of it about if you take the vaccine, if you do this and you do that, this is what's going to happen to you. You're gonna have Bell's palsy, and some stuff is absolutely ridiculous. They're going to put a chip in you. All these different things, and so when all this fear has taken a toll in the way that kids are acting out, some of them have locked down onto themselves and are not really interacting with others. Some of them are overly, and so you don't know what is happening. And so that's why it's really important. We're part of a Johnston County Partners group. And so we try to come together and we have here we have policy advisory councils, and we work with all elements of the population. We work with whether you from the public, private, all of these things. We're working with them, and so it's looking at it from three different standpoints, not just from the client who may have a need standpoint, but okay. What about policy? You set policy. You're in leadership. You set policy. What can you do to affect the change? Okay, community-based, faith-based. What can you do? So all of these elements come together, civic organizations, all of these nonprofits come together. What can we do? Because it's not just one problem. It's a chain of them. And if there's a weak link in a chain, that chain is not going to be able to hold. And so we had to work together to strengthen that chain, to bridge that gap between needs and resources. And I think we have some dynamic leaders in Johnston County that is working toward doing that. I've already referenced our executive director, E. Marie Watson, but you got Dr. Pearson at the health department. She is an African-American woman. She has been dynamic as far as trying to tackle healthcare issues, and especially the disparities as far as race is concerned. You got Judge Eddie Rawls, who's a district court judge, but very active in the community. And I don't want to get into the habit of when you start calling names, I just put those out there. But there's a lot of different people who are in place now who are at the table. And I would just say, Beth said earlier that a lot of white people don't want to face, but what I want on the other end of the spectrum is for Black people to understand and learn how to become advocates for yourself and for the people in your circle of influence. Talk to them, but educate yourself first. No, the internet is not a fount of accurate information. So go to reliable sources, educate yourself so that you can share the information, equip the people in your circle of influence so that they can move forward. And it's like a ripple effect, that the information that they get is accurate and is beneficial, not just to you, but everybody that you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's funny, I think we've got one more question that's come in and I just want to acknowledge it before our time is up. And I think you might have answered some of this already in what you just said. But somebody wanted to know, and we hear this, I'm going to read this verbatim. We hear this a lot directed towards white people. We hear them say, do the work. What does that mean to this panel?
Okay.
What does do the work mean?
Self-examination.
I'm doing quotes because that's what people say, not because.
Okay. Self-examination. Self-examination. I use, for example, the gentleman who said, I had to sit down and examine my heart and look at the role that I play. And if you just acknowledge that there is a problem, you may not want to, but if you look at it realistically, if you just look at what's going on now, and I asked myself, what did you think when you watched the George Floyd murder? He said, I didn't watch it. I said, what? He said, I didn't watch it. I'm more focused on my family and my church. And so I didn't watch it, and the community. But how can you help anybody in those groups? If that's out there, and that was one of the driving forces, one of them, just one, behind the push for change. It's always been there, but it got new life based on the loss of his life, and Breonna Taylor and some Eric out, a lot of different people. But if you will recognize that, and I told him, I said, if you make a comment and you say, some of my friend and I went to the mall, but instead of saying my friend and I went to the mall, you said my friend, and she's an African American, went to the mall. Why do you feel the need to say that? So you may just need self-examination, I guess, is what would be the key. And to educate yourself on what's going on and look at the history, the background of all these stories, all these incidences that are being reported, and then move forward and see where justice didn't prevail and why people are angry and why people are sick and tired of going along to get along.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of resources out there to figure out your biases. Every single person in the world has biases. You can start there. Look at those implicit biases. Look at how the different media has shaped who you are, not because you wanted it to, just because it's happened. Mm-hmm. So, and once you know those things, then you can start doing the research, and doing the work means reading about the history, like you said, Tina, and listening and getting involved, and not just ignoring the problem because you're white and it doesn't affect you. It affects everybody. Our communities are not as strong as they can be because of racism.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both for this incredible conversation today and just jumping right in. I want to thank everybody that's hung on with us to the very end. I do see a couple of questions came through, and if you both don't mind, I'd love to reach out to you via email and maybe get your answers, and we can share them with folks after the fact. Okay. Keep this conversation going. For anybody who's interested in learning more about Partnership for Children of Johnston County or Johnston Lee Harnett Community Action, I did put the URLs for their websites in the chat. Please go check them out, reach out, ask questions, stay involved. And if you'd like to sign up for future United Way events, including more conversations like these, you can find that at unitedwaytriangle.org. Mm-hmm. Thank you, everybody. And I hope everybody has a great, safe weekend.
And Devin, we thank you for this opportunity and the United Way of the Greater Triangle. I remember when it first came aboard and it was like, oh no, it's getting ready to change. It's getting ready to change. Who knew that you were a knight in shining armor, rode in on your white steed? And we appreciate everything that you've done. You have affected so many, allowed us to help so many people stay in their homes and have a sense of safety. And we do, from the bottom of our heart, we appreciate it.
Yes, we really do appreciate the United Way. The COVID relief efforts were so amazing and so quick and so
Yes.
right on, like just right on point. And we do appreciate everything the United Way does for us in the county, and look forward to keeping a great partnership. And it's always so good to see you, Tina. So
You
thank
too,
you
Beth.
for being my co-panelist today.
Yes. And to let you know,
All right.
I know
Well, thank you all. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean, you cut out for a second. I didn't mean to
I was just going to
interrupt
say
you.
that Beth and I come together, and our conversations, if you did not see us, you would not know that it was two different races. And it would not because it's because we had the same hopes, the same dreams for the people around us, for this country, for this world. But for Johnston County, we have the same hopes and dreams. And that's what it's about. Not whether you're Black, whether you're white, but treating each other with respect and working together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to keep working with you, Tina, because we're going to do this, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, on that positive note, I'm going to close us out here. Thank you both. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the future.
Thank you.